official. Okay, it's official now. We have a recording. Now, here's some things about grading. I thought, yeah, yesterday didn't go as, yeah, you knew. But I'm closer. If you turned in weekly questions on time, those should be graded, including the one from the weekly question 13. Should be graded, but I just finished. And then I'll finish the rest of those that were turned in a little bit late. This afternoon between the two classes, hopefully, that's my goal. And then whatever I don't finish on weekly questions, I should be able to finish tonight. Tomorrow looks like book review day. And tomorrow, no soccer, shouldn't be anything else going on. So tomorrow, yeah, last night was the end of soccer tryouts. And yeah, 2 people that were supposed to run the tryouts didn't come. And there's only 3 people that were supposed to run the tryouts plus me. So I guess that's 4. So ended up with more work than I anticipated. That's the way life goes, though, isn't it? But I will finish your book reviews on Friday. And then my goal will be to wrap up whatever you turn in on Friday over the weekend so that you'll know, hopefully by Sunday, you'll have a pretty good idea of where you sit as far as grades. What I need for you to do, if possible, I know it is, if something that you have turned in has not been graded. Now, right now, if you turn in something late or the weekly question number 13 late, I know it was probably just a day or 2, or for some of you, a few minutes. I'm not trying to be rude or anything. I just graded the on-time ones first. So if you're missing a weekly question that's late, I should finish those tonight. Book reviews, I should finish tomorrow. I've graded a few, but not very many, to be fair. And then everything else over the weekend. If you turn something in and it wasn't graded, you got to let me know, because I think that I've graded most stuff. There was somebody in the first class who said, I turned in 5 weekly questions and you haven't graded any of them. Yeah, that's a problem. So if that's the case with you, I need to know this. Also, if you submit stuff and I haven't graded it, it's not because I'm angry with you, it's because I don't see it. There are times that if you submit something and you don't finish submitting, maybe you log off before it's complete, that sort of said, somebody hasn't said anything about their grades. That's good. Yay. Sorry. But I wasn't talking about you in particular. Sorry. But if you don't finish the submission, if you log out before it's submitted, what I get is like a little blue circle that looks like a clock or a pie graph. And it'll have like 2/3 or 1/3, but I can't see any of it. So, and I can't do anything about that. So I'll try to go back and look, but it's also kind of your job as well. If you haven't had something graded, I occasionally, and I have in this class, have a couple of students who will tell me, and a couple of you know it's not you. Yeah, I don't look at my grades, so I don't know. Not my problem. Your job, I mean, you have some jobs. It's not my job to teach you. It's your job to learn. I mean, it is my job to teach you, but it's your job to learn as well. And your grades are supposed to be a reflection of what you've learned. Why are you not checking your grades? I know like 5 or 6 of you check them every 30 seconds, but the rest of you, no, the rest of you are fine. There's like 2 or 3 of you that don't check. Check your grades. Check your grades. Yeah, okay. So you double check, and I need to know stuff. So if there's something wrong, don't wait until Wednesday to tell me, because my grades are due Tuesday. So you got to tell me, okay? If you don't tell me, it's hard for me to fix after I submit grades, okay? It's not like a high school thing. I had somebody email me last week about a grade last fall. No, no, not helpful at all. So if there is something, even though I know we have teased 4 or 5 of you about being fairly grade centric, man, at least you're in the loop, you're staying on top of stuff. So I know it's not all about grades, except for, a couple of you, but it is also about grades. You got to make sure that you get what you deserve. Okay. So if you've turned something in and I haven't graded it, send me an email. Okay. I need to know. You got to tell me. You got to tell me. Also, when I go through weekly questions and I say, like, be sure you talk about this or be sure you talk about that. When I read the answer and you don't do it, it's irritating. I'm not even going to lie. I was grading your weekly questions about defend and not possess and conquer. And I told you, I said, look, when you answer this question, you can't ignore the other side. You can't just pretend that we didn't occasionally do some noble thing and also talk about stuff that was before 9/11, but fairly recent in US history, like after World War II. I got people talking about, I don't know, stuff in the 1860s. I got people talking about how every time the United States does something, it's noble and good. No. And every time the United States does stuff, it's completely selfish. Like, no. Like somebody was arguing that there was no good reason for the United States to enter World War II except money. It's like, did you not hear about Hitler? I mean, come on. I know we tend to be on edges of stuff like the United States is completely great or completely terrible. You got to know it's in the middle. And it could lean more to completely terrible or completely great, depending on the time period and your perspective. I get that. I do. However, very few things except Hitler are completely terrible or completely great. Hitler's, if you're wondering, oh my gosh, you better not be one. Completely. All right. I'll stop talking about stuff like that. But let's look at the weekly question. Weekly question. And then if you guys will please, please, please do some stuff I ask you to do on the weekly question. Please. This one's like a super simple weekly question, though. It's really good. So you're comparing Obama and Trump's presidential campaigns. So try to stick with the presidential campaigns. If you have like super hate or love of either of these guys and you have to mention that after you talk about the campaign, feel free. I mean, that's fine. But remember, the bulk of your answer really needs to be about what the question is asking, presidential campaign. So I know we've talked about this. I think we could say ad nauseum at this point, but name names, use some dates, because, it's a history class. Also, the other thing I clearly have not convinced you of, when you talk about historical events, you want to talk about them in chronological order, in the order in which they happen, because there's logic to that. I know some of you guys are usually those math science people. It's like history is a waste of my time. We are going to make billions of dollars being a mathematician or physicist or whatever the heck, of engineer, whatever the heck you're going to be, and you're a math science person. There's logic to math and science, except statistics. There's no logic to that. But there's logic to history too. And if something happens, sometimes it causes something else to happen. So you talk about stuff in the order in which they happen, events, stuff, things, in the order in which they happen as often as possible, because historical things don't happen in isolation. They cause things, and relationships lead to other relationships. And okay, all right. But chronological order. Yeah, and specific examples. I mean, you just saying like the United States is greedy and just loves oil. All right, the United States could be greedy, and yeah, we use a lot of oil. We do, there's no doubt. But, to say that we protected Kuwait because the only reason we did, probably partly, but probably the only reason that we protected Kuwait is because it was an oil-rich country. It's like, well, maybe Iraq had also taken it over and they went to the United Nations. Now, you could argue that we chose Kuwait instead of some other country, Rwanda, or somebody who'd gone to the UN and asked for help. That's an argument I could live with. And then you could say, and likely it was because they were more important because of the oil flow or the wealth or that sort of stuff. Not going to dispute that, but you got to bring in more stuff. Also, I could easily argue with you, although I don't really want to, that the United States was the largest exporter of oil over the last several years. So we've got plenty here. We do. It's not like we lack it, although I know there's a little crisis with a pipeline gasoline southeast right now. But everything is always more complicated than just the surface. That's great, that's terrible, we're greedy, we're selfless. There's always more to it, always more to it. And, to be an honest student of history, you got to look at the stuff that you agree with and the stuff you disagree with. And I think if you can, there are times that and again, I know I probably didn't do the best job last class with the Donald Trump subject, which still, I'm even laughing thinking about it. But as a rule, people who support the opposite view of you are not crazy. They just see things differently. Now, sometimes crazy people see things differently. But I mean, there may be a logic to someone else's position, and it will help you understand the logic of the other position, because you shouting at somebody they're wrong isn't persuasive. If you can understand why they support a position and then kind of calmly argue why that position maybe has some faults, also understanding the faults in your own position, I think it puts us in a better spot to find the right answers, to correct things when we're wrong, and maybe to get along a little better too. But anyway, back to the weekly question. So for Obama and Trump's presidential campaign, I'm really sure you got to talk about how they present themselves to the United States and their use of technology. I think those are the two big things. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes along with the two big things. So who is attracted to their candidacy because of how they present themselves and how they use technology, and what's innovative about that? For both of these folks, they're raising money using technology, and they're doing this in a new, somebody just came in the class and I already forgot who it was. Goodness. But I'll check here at the end. Oh, I think I remember now, but I'll check. They're using technology in a new way. So with President Obama, he's really kind of the first technically connected sort of president. We had cell phones and Blackberries. President Obama really liked his Blackberry. It was kind of the high-tech thing of the time. I don't know, are there still Blackberries? I really don't know. I remember having one. I don't know if I got one because I thought it was cool because Trump, because Obama had one, but it had a little keyboard with buttons and stuff. It was very fun. Maybe it was better for old people. I'm not even gonna lie. But he was connected to his BlackBerry to the point where the Secret Service kind of had to revamp a little and get a little better understanding of technology. So he was, pretty well connected technologically, plus used technology to campaign, raise money, and really attracted a lot of younger voters. And that's something that you really see with Obama. People who normally avoided the political process, they didn't vote, they didn't get involved. They almost, I don't know that idolizes too much, but it's pretty close to that. And he had kind of cool, trendy artwork for his posters, and people put it on shirts because it was, artistically pleasing, as well as it made them happy politically. So, he was, he paid attention to lots of media stuff, more modern media stuff that people didn't necessarily pay attention to, and it attracted younger voters, and also helped him raise money more easily. And he's was and still is very good at fundraising. Yeah. The Obamas are really good at that, and the Clintons really good at fundraising. Oddly enough, Trump, not as good at fundraising, but also really good at using free media to get publicity, so that he didn't have to he didn't have to use money to buy ads. And if you're wondering, what do politicians do with the money they raise? Do you wonder that? They typically spend it on media, travel and media, that sort of stuff. Sometimes they keep it. They do, and then after the campaign is over, they can use it for other things. There are weird rules about that, but apparently the best way to get around some of the rules is to save the money till your campaign is over, and then you can use it for expenses that probably weren't intended, but probably kind of quietly understood. So you see more individual donations because of technology from through both the Obama and the Trump campaign. Obama presents himself really as kind of your modern, I don't know, that in touch sort of fellow. He's younger, got a very pleasant family, seems like a really nice family person. He's got a very educated wife with a, an equally powerful career. I know she wasn't president, but, in a lot of ways, like the Clintons were. And with both of them having very similar educational backgrounds, very similar professional accomplishments, that sort of thing. And also with Obama, you got the cute little kids, and they're just a kind of the modern version of the Kennedys. Yeah, they're the 20th century Kennedys. That's what we. Yeah. Okay. Trump. I know. Trump. He's kind of an in-your-face guy, and he's going to present himself. Somebody stayed after, and I didn't even talk about this as much as I should have, but somebody stayed after and said, what was that whole drain the swamp thing? The drain the swamp thing. I forgot to talk about that, but Trump presents himself as the billionaire outsider who's going to go into Washington and clean up the swamp. He's going to drain the swamp. And the swamp, we don't have as many of those, I suppose, in our part of Texas. It's more of an East Texas thing or Louisiana thing, but swamps where I don't even know, it's the alligator, I think, hangs out there. Oh, there's crazy nutria. Oh gosh, okay. But creepy things hang out in the swamp, and you're not going to go in there. It's murky. You can't see through it. There's all kinds of mess in there. It's dangerous. That's what Trump said Washington, D.C. was. So he was going to go in and shake that thing up, drain the swamp, end business as usual, because there's sort of a perception among probably lots of people, but especially Trump supporters, that the federal government is corrupt. So the best way that you can fix that is put a dude in there like Trump, who's just going to shake it all up and remake it, perhaps in his own image with, giant gold letters on the outside. Or he's just going to, because he's not an outsider, he's going to do more things that the average person would want. So Trump's also very good with technology, raises money this way, also has groups of people that campaign for him on Facebook. And Trump and Twitter. Oh my goodness. Now, President Obama is the first president to kind of consistently use Twitter, but he's very formal and what is the right word? Traditional in his use of social media. Trump, as we know, is not very traditional in his use of social media and likes to, when he did the debate, called people names, made fun of the size of their hands or their feet, which is apparently, well, it is some other sort of slur to their manhood, that sort of thing. Called people lazy or low energy or sleepy or that sort of thing. And oh my goodness, Trump, he was a whole different kind of guy. But on purpose, because he wanted the American people to know that he was going to get in there and fight, that he was a counterpuncher. He loves to say that as well, and that he's just a different sort of guy. And all those things were correct. Yeah. And I think the things that Obama presented were also true, but they used technology and media in different ways during their campaign, and they present themselves personally in different ways. Okay, checking the chat, sorry. Oh yeah, no worries about the getting online. Sorry, I was just seeing what sort of animal was on my back porch. A squirrel. All right. Have we talked about the weekly question enough? Do you have a pretty good idea? Please, 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 specific examples though, a couple, On this one, it's not going to be so much dates and events and that kind of thing, but it has to be, at least half a page. Come on, guys, wrap it up. Do it well. Give me some examples. And the book has some stuff in there that'll help. And remember your friend, the index. So, but this is all in the last chapter. It should be pretty simple to find, I hope. All right. But the big mistake that people made last semester on this question is talking about what they did when they were president. Don't compare what they did when they were president. That could take like, oh my gosh, that could be, a 10-page paper. Don't do that. Just the campaign, okay? And if you just can't resist it, you can say something about each of them that you liked or disliked on the way out. But don't forget your main task. Compare the presidential campaigns, all right? All right. Is anybody going to ask anything? You're good? You happy with that discussion? Is there anything you want to add? Everybody's good? All right. Okay. All right. Free 100. Honestly, free 100. Maybe. I don't think I can do completely free 100. But I do think this one is pretty simple, and I probably won't be overly picky. Because, part of my goal here too is to get it graded fairly quickly. I'll try. Also, I didn't really say this, but anything that I've graded recently, like the last couple times, when you look at it and look at the comments as well, if you disagree, you can always tell me that you disagree with the grade. That never is going to bother me. So, but you have to do it really soon, as we've talked about before. I'm never terribly offended if you think maybe I overlooked something, just let me know. But you also have to remember how you go about that is pretty good. It's pretty important. I occasionally will have a student that'll email like, "You're so stupid. I can't believe you overlooked this." That's probably not the best way to go about it. But I mean, you do you. I'm just saying it's probably not that helpful. All right. Let me see if I can find the review that doesn't have the questions on it. Here we go. That worked out. Sometimes it doesn't. Okay. Free 100. Okay. I was just checking to see if I missed something in the chat. All right. So let's go over a couple things before you take the quiz. All right. Pretty basic stuff, I think. Oh gosh. I mean, yeah, it's always tricky for me because, I put questions on there that I think the answers are fairly obvious. But also I've taught history longer than you've been. You can't take the test twice. No. Y- you're not supposed to take the test twice. Are you telling me you did? Don't take the test twice. The reason that I give a second, there is I feel like I've said this before, but maybe not. It will allow you to take the test twice, but I'm not going to take the better of your two grades. The reason that the program allows it, I have options, and I chose the let them take it twice option, is that weird possibility, doesn't happen very often, that you start the quiz and then something goes wrong and you lose the internet. I don't want that to be your only option. And that's really obvious because you'll have only done like 2 questions and you'll have spent like 4 minutes. Yeah. Now, if you've done 2 questions and you spent 3 hours, that's a whole different issue that we'll have to talk about. So, but I do program it so you can have that second start in case something goes wrong with the technology. But if that happens, you'd better email me the second something is, as soon as it comes back up, of course, and tell me like, oh, I had this problem, so that I'll be aware. All right. So, for the quiz, foreign policy for Nixon. I know we've talked about Nixon quite a bit. It seems like the questions I put on there are a little more geared to foreign than domestic policy. So stuff that he does overseas, détente, so they're getting Egypt and Israel to stop fighting with each other. Now, you could argue that was pretty selfless in that one question, but also, we'd had an oil shortage during this time period. So he's not just doing that because it'd be cool if Egypt and Israel got along. That is a super volatile part of the world. I know you're probably watching the news occasionally and you've noticed they're having some issues in the Gaza region right now. So, and goodness, I don't know how that ever gets fixed. And I don't know that US intervention makes that better or worse. Who knows? But part of the reason the rest of the world is concerned is, I know some of it's oil. Some of it is where they're located. You've seen the map. So they're right at a confluence of a whole bunch of countries. So, if they're, and the Suez Canal is, kind of in that region too. And a lot of commerce flows through there. So, it's safety and commerce and, yeah, and oil. It's all those things. All right. Détente is the idea. It's just the general idea that rather than threatening other countries mutually assured destruction and arms race, that maybe it's time to tone that down. And you see some actual improvement on arms limitations with the SALT I treaty. Somebody argued in one question that SALT I and SALT II both were helpful. SALT II never gets ratified because the Secretary of State, who's Carter's Secretary of State, kind of sabotages it. So SALT I is legitimate, starts to get rid of ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, which were, high-tech, pretty important weapons. And those would be the ones, if we were going to destroy another country, that would be what we would use. And shuttle diplomacy, you saw that used with when Nixon sent Kissinger between different countries. It was usually Egypt and Israel, but also the Soviet Union and China. And this is when we're going to open our foreign relations with China and start talking to them again, in part because, ignoring a couple billion people is stupid, but also because if we start talking to China, then the Soviet Union might start to wonder what's up there, and then China and the Soviet Union will have a rivalry, and that will distract them from other things. I know, sneaky, isn't it? Foreign policy is often sneaky. Also, I should have said this before. I feel like I have, but maybe not as completely as I meant to. Foreign policy for any country is typically not selfless because if you have foreign policy, it's because you want something for your own country. It's either to protect your country, but you want to give some advantage to your country because that's where you live and that's who you work for. And it doesn't mean that you just want to overrun other countries, although I know we have in the past, and it is what superpowers do, and I'm not denying that. But I'm just saying that there's self-interest in any country's foreign policy. So when you criticize US foreign policy because it's self-interested, it's kind of the nature of foreign policy. What country do you know of that when they have foreign policy, it's like, hey, we're just going to give you this and this and this and this, and there's no strings attached? Always strings attached, because foreign policy, whether it's giving money away or programs or protection, is an investment in your own self-interest in someone else's country. It is. I mean, there's no way around that. That's what foreign policy is. Or maybe if you're equals with some other country, you have a shared foreign policy interest. So, maybe the United States and I don't know who you would consider the United States equal to as far as foreign policy, but we'll say it's the United States and China decide one day that they have some self-interest they want to preserve. I think the United States and China could pretty much get the rest of the world to do whatever we wanted if we agreed on something. Because just a lot of, we have the largest economy in the world. Theirs is the second largest and will be the largest by the time you guys are part of the large economy. When you guys are, in your 30s and 40s, yeah, China will have the largest economy in the world. So the US and China economically and militarily could probably do whatever they wanted. And of course, I mean, you're enough of an observer of foreign affairs to know that China's kind of on the rise and the United States might be on the decline a little, or maybe just not on the rise as much as China. I don't know how you would, but anyway. Foreign policy, always self-interest. Ford's presidency is really brief. What you want to remember about Ford is he pardons Nixon. That's pretty much it. And that he's the only president we ever had who wasn't elected to be president or vice president, because Spiro Agnew resigned and then Richard Nixon resigned. Really no evidence to suggest that Nixon picked Ford because he knew he would pardon him. I don't think anyone knew that. It's definitely why things don't go well for Ford when he runs again, but also the economy is pretty stinky. We have high inflation, we have the gas shortage, which we're seeing a little bit of briefly, probably briefly in part of our country. And people get testy during that. If you watch the news, you've already seen people fighting and spitting on each other. Isn't that the craziest thing? What the heck? It's worse than a soccer game. Red card, by the way, if you spit on someone. But Ford's presidency, pardoning Nixon, and really, really, really bad economy. Stagflation is this inflation and stagnant economy. So high prices that don't get any better. And the win thing was whip inflation now, which was supposed to be some program to decrease inflation, but it didn't work. So it's pretty much a no-brainer. Carter will get elected. Things to remember about Carter, 3 Mile Island issue. This is a nuclear reactor core meltdown that almost led to a crack in the reactor and a nuclear accident. It didn't happen, but it scared the living daylights out of us, as it should have. And it really kind of cut the development of nuclear power in the United States. And some of you are going like, well, good. Others of you are like, no, that doesn't pollute the environment. Yeah, unless you have a core reactor meltdown and crack, and then it does pollute. I mean, Chernobyl, you know what I'm saying. But, most countries that have nuclear power, things seem to go pretty well. I think France is always our big example because most of their power comes from nuclear power. But they're also fairly internal. They don't have as much coastline. Japan does this as well, but because of earthquakes and tsunamis, it doesn't always go as well in Japan. Yeah. All right. Camp David Accords, the peace agreement building on the shuttle diplomacy of the Nixon administration. And this is between Egypt and Israel, and an agreement essentially to stop fighting. And they don't fight anymore. Egypt and Israel don't. And Egypt was and still is a really powerful country, a very financially powerful country, militarily powerful country in the Middle East as well. And it does end up costing Anwar Sadat his life because there were factions within his country, also factions within Israel that really benefited from the fighting in a variety of ways. Also, there's always somebody in charge of a country somewhere who's a little off and believes that their presidency, dictatorship, whatever, is going to lead to the end of something, like the big end of something. And yeah, those guys are kind of dangerous. Neither of the guys in Egypt or Israel during the time period were those guys. Yeah, every once in a while. Well, and you like the dude in North Korea, or maybe dude in Iran. Yeah. Okay. All right. Panama Canal Treaty, which was probably seen as bad at the time, but better in retrospect, returns the Panama Canal to Panama. So they own it, we pay rent, that sort of thing. And we also don't control it. And people at the time thought it was going to go poorly. And a lot of you mentioned the communist activity in Latin America in the last weekly question. We thought it was going to go poorly because of all that. The evil, godless communists in Central and South America would take over the canal. I don't think anybody worries about that anymore. Do you guys worry about the evil, godless communists anywhere? You worry about them? Yeah, that's definitely part of my generation. We even made movies about that. Not me personally, but Red Dawn, I think, was the teen movie. And all the Rocky movies, of course. But, this turned out to be not anything to be terribly upset about. And in retrospect, it's like, no, it makes sense. And the Iranian hostage crisis happens toward the end of the Carter presidency because the United States gave refuge to the Shah of Iran, who we'd set up as a dictator, and the Iranian people were in the process of overthrowing him. They were going to execute him. And he came to the US for cancer treatment. He did come to the US for cancer treatment, but he also came because they were going to execute him. All right. And that was not well received that's my understatement of the day, by the Iranian people. And so a group of Iranians took hostages in the US Embassy. And the United States sent a rescue mission, which failed. Helicopters crashed into each other, and it made us look weak. Also, a bunch of stuff happens during the Carter presidency. I should mention again that the economy was just really bad. I remember, yeah, the Carter economy. And if you do you listen to old people talk about current events? I've heard some older people, older than me even. I know it's surprising they're still alive, who say stuff like, oh my gosh, with the oil shortage and the weakness that our current president is projecting around the world, it feels like the 70s again. It's like, yeah, no, not just yet. Not yet. Okay, don't overreact just yet. The 70s were pretty rough. A lot of unemployment, really high inflation, gas shortages, and some unusual foreign policy. And I am not suggesting it's too early in the Biden administration to have any conclusions about anything. My opinion. You don't have to agree with me ever. Yeah. All right. The Reagan administration, hostages freed on the first day of Reagan's administration. So that made him look tough. And then he's got tax cuts, deregulation, which some people love and other people hate. It does tend to stimulate the economy for certain segments of the economy, and it frees up some cash for certain people, but it doesn't typically benefit all segments of the socioeconomic strata evenly. It usually helps rich people more than poor people. That's what I'm trying to say there. I don't know if I said that well. And that's the intent. The thought is rich people start businesses, so they keep people employed. So you want to do things that benefit them financially. There's some logic to that, and there's not some logic to that. It's like if you're listening to current events and people are arguing about stimulus checks and unemployment and that sort of stuff. It's like, well, of course people don't go back to work because their unemployment checks are higher than their paychecks. And then the counter argument is, why are their paychecks so low? And why would anybody who's an adult work for $8 an hour on a 40-hour per week job? And then there's arguments and counter arguments, that sort of thing. So kind of the same deal with the tax cuts. Deregulation, which is both great and terrible. The PATCO strike is the air traffic controllers. We talked about that, but Reagan fires all those guys. SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars is kind of mocked, and then we use some of the technologies developed. Some of it really wasn't possible. Iran-Contra affair, where we sell weapons to Iran, use the money to fund a counterinsurgency in Nicaragua. And that, of course, is illegal, violation of Boland Amendment. And then Reagan's going to give a big speech like, that didn't happen. And then about a month later, it did happen, I just didn't know. And people go like, man, how are you the president? You don't know. So discussion of plausible deniability goes along with that. And the historic appointment of a woman to the Supreme Court, that would be Sandra Day O'Connor, an interesting jurist, kind of middle-ish, not super conservative, not super liberal, had spent some time going to law school in Arizona, which was a little different as well, or going to college in Arizona, I think at a state university. Most of you probably know, most of the folks on the Supreme Court went to Harvard Law or Yale Law. So a little different perspective, a little more Western, and certainly, had a different view of things. And people generally respected her, or genuinely, probably both. And then she'll resign from the court later, yeah. But she stays for about 20 years. You know that people typically stay on the Supreme Court in the modern era. Yeah, I know you know. All right, for chapter 27, Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And I think it's easy to get that a little confused with what goes on during the younger Bush administration. So this is Iraq invading Kuwait. Kuwait goes to the UN and says, hey, we're not the 13th province of Iraq. Get these dudes out. And the US is going to lead a very broad coalition of pretty much everybody in the world to get Kuwait out of Iraq. And it's not a terribly difficult military task. It's pretty popular worldwide. I know you can easily argue we only went there for oil. I would say if you argued that oil was one of the major reasons, I'd be okay with that. We only went there, I don't know, I mean, Iraq did invade them. But I get that there are reasons that we would help them and not other countries. I get that part of it, but Iraq invading Kuwait, that probably, yeah, and Kuwait wasn't in a position to defend themselves. So some of it's legitimate, but I understand that some of the reasons, I get it, I do. Okay, but anyway, and the goal here really was just to boot Iraq out of Kuwait. That's what we do. Saddam remains in power, that sort of thing. So people argue later, we should have gone beyond the UN directives, but we don't. Savings and loan crisis, those are different sort of lending institutions, banking institutions had looser regulations about their loans. A lot of them gave dangerous loans that got defaulted on, and lots of federal funds had to be paid because of the insurance on those loans. And George Herbert Walker, old Bush's son, Neil, owned one of those. I think he lived in Houston as well. So that's a Texas thing. The Busher.com recession, so a bunch of online businesses developed during this time period, probably a little irrationally. So many of them fail. It's going to cause a general decline in the upper middle class. And since the upper middle class people always vote, it's going to also mean that George Herbert Walker Bush is a one-term president, because if you mess with upper middle class people's money, they don't forget that. No, it's true. Yeah. All right. For those of us kind of in the middle or the lower part of the middle class, or you're just broke, like we're used to being broke. So it's like it's Thursday for us. But yeah, that's like someone will pay for my bad business decisions. So they did. All right. Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill. I know we've talked about that several times. Very weird. Very weird. Clarence Thomas was the Supreme Court Justice. And Anita Hill was the person who accused him, also a fine lawyer in her own right, and very distinguished, accused him of sexual harassment, and he is barely confirmed, and it's been a little controversial ever since. Clinton administration, the healthcare initiative, contract with America, healthcare initiative run by Mrs. Clinton, which wasn't kind of a predecessor to Obamacare, but not successful. Contract with America was the pushback from Republicans who wanted to limit terms, balance the budget, and probably will push the Clinton presidencies into a more conservative area. So the Clinton presidency is going to then have something called workfare, where you have to work a certain number of hours to get government assistance. And before that wasn't the case. Primarily affects single mothers who have to get a job making minimum wage and then probably have to pay for childcare while they have that job. So they're probably paying out everything they make in childcare. This isn't something that will last really in most ways beyond the Clinton administration. Sending troops to Bosnia and Somalia and lots of other places as well. This is probably the era, because we send troops so many places for so many reasons, that it would have been easier for you to find a place where we sent troops where it really just seemed to be to save people's lives. Bosnia is probably the best example of that. And impeachment, Clinton gets impeached, not convicted not because he had an affair, because he lied about the affair under oath. Yeah. And most of the senators went, no, good call, and didn't convict him. So the people who did push for the impeachment were probably these contract with America dudes in the House. And you notice if you follow politics much, the House is much more radical than the Senate because they run for election every 2 years. So they're essentially always campaigning. So they need to get their names in the news. So if there's crazy stuff going on, it's typically in the House. Rand Paul is probably our exception in the Senate, but he's from Kentucky. I think they just like him. He's an interesting fellow. All right. All right, I'm making too many political comments. We'll wrap this up here. So George W. Bush, election controversy, Bush v. Gore, Supreme Court case that essentially says Bush is going to be president. Yeah. So he's selected, not elected, maybe. But then 9/11 really unifies us, and the response to 9/11, in some ways we'll look at it and go like, no, that's pretty good. In other ways, like, cool, Patriot Act and troops overseas, and still troops overseas, although by the end of the year, probably not. So, but it's been an awfully long time, 20 years. All right. General changes in immigration, the economy, civil rights, and segregation throughout these presidencies, and we've talked about that. Immigration from more places than Mexico and Western Europe. Lots more Asian and African immigration. The economy is going to become much more international, much more based on technology. We're going to manufacture fewer things. Civil rights really will change in some ways and probably include more discussion of reproductive rights and LGBTQ plus and gender discussions, that sort of thing. And segregation now becomes much more of a socioeconomic thing. Where you live, what you can afford reflects where you go to school, that kind of thing as well. And for most people, education is probably your path to success. So if you end up, if you're poor and you live in a poor school district, you may not have, you won't probably have the same opportunities that people who live in Westlake, no offense if you live in Westlake, but you know, they probably have different opportunities, maybe. Because the folks, they've got cash. You know what I'm saying? All right. And George Bush, kind of a little bit, Homeland Security Agency, response to Hurricane Katrina, which was not overwhelmingly good, military interventions, recession, immigration policy. You know, you saw the general amnesty immigration during the Reagan administration, and then you'll see more of a conservative immigration policy through this era, and then maybe the beginnings of DACA in the Obama era, and then Trump would push back against DACA. So Homeland Security Agency, Hurricane Katrina, we're going to tighten the borders, and we're going to say that it's because of terrorism. And in some instances, that's probably legitimate. In other instances, it's probably not. I mean, because that's, as somebody really pointed out nicely in their essay, that there's always the dichotomy of what we say we're going to do and why we're actually going to do it. And we can always make what we're doing look good, even though the reasons, there are other reasons we do stuff that don't look as good. And as long as we don't present that as the main reason, then yeah. Well, anyway. Military campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan, initiated during the Bush presidency, continued during the Obama presidency. Some decline in the Trump presidency, and with predictions, we'll see them end during the Biden presidency. He didn't make the book because the book, you know, we couldn't have published it during this class. So, Obama use of technology in the campaign. Recession, you know, some of the recession, Bush to Obama, is that housing bubble that we talked about and the jobless recovery. And that's in part because the technology has changed what we do for work and how we work. And there's honestly fewer low skill, low tech jobs available. So people who used to maybe be able to make a living at a manufacturing plant, that sort of thing, it's much harder for them now. And there aren't as many opportunities. So those are guys that are probably going to be, you know, working in stores or doing, you know, like cleaning sort of work, or uh, restaurants, that kind of thing. Although I'm not saying that working in a restaurant, especially serving people and cooking food, I know is quite an important skill. Probably not one I possess. So, um, Obamacare, health care reform, big thing in the Obama administration, of course. Military campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan continue in jobless recovery. And then Trump, why does he win the nomination? I'm going to laugh again every time I say Trump. Use of technology in the campaign, profile of Trump voters, and the US withdrawing from the Paris Agreement on climate change, and then Trump and immigration, where what you honestly see in both the Obama and the Trump administration is more deportations. You really see that begin in a big way in the Obama administration. And then you see the return to Mexico policy or awaiting your asylum claim from your home country in the Trump administration, which really slows down asylum claims because you have to stay in your home country while you wait. So in the modern era, the Bush, Obama, Trump era, we really see a pushback against immigration, in part because of 9/11, or at least that's, again, one of you would successfully argue, I know, that that's the reason. It may not be the reason. That's the stated reason, but we've talked about this a little bit before. When our economy is really solid and growing, and I know the stock market is solid and growing, but for whatever reason, it's not the most accurate reflection of the economy right now, because it just isn't, for a variety of reasons. But when our economy is solid and growing, we tend to be pretty pro-immigration because we want more workers, we want more people, people are buying, selling, producing, that kind of stuff. When the economy slows down, that's usually when we are not as excited about immigration. So we're kind of in the not as excited about immigration point after 9/11. Part of it is terrorism, but a lot of it's the economy. And I know those things can be related and are, but not completely. This is complicated stuff, isn't it? All right, let me think if there's anything else that I wanted to mention. I don't feel like there necessarily is, but I also wanted to see if you guys have any questions. Is there anything you guys want to ask before you run off? Eat lunch, do whatever you need to do. Okay. I'm going to stop the recording. Don't go just yet because I want to double check the roll. I think I got it, but